Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Offset Podcast. And today we're continuing our conversation about ARM processors and the future of ARM in the post industry. Stay tuned.
This podcast is sponsored by Flanders Scientific, leaders in color-accurate display solutions for professional video. Whether you're a colorist, an editor, a DIT, or a broadcast engineer, Flanders Scientific has a professional display solution to meet your needs. Learn more at flandersscientific.com.
All right, well, Joey, we couldn't get enough, man. We couldn't get enough in part one. Everybody, welcome back to another installment of the Offset Podcast. I am Robbie Carmen. With me, as always, is my partner, Joey Deanna. Hey, Joey, how are you, man?
Hey, welcome back.
Yeah, man, welcome back. So we obviously had a lot to talk about ARM in general, and decided to break this up into two parts so they're a little easier to digest in one sitting. And so we are continuing on talking about ARM processors and the future of ARM in post here in part two. We had a lot of good stuff we covered in part one, but in part two, I want to get a little bit more into some of our prognostication, where we kind of think what our next computer choices might look like, things like cloud computing with ARM and stuff like that, and kind of, prognosticate a little bit about where we think things are going. And of course, we're not fortune tellers, but I think we have a pretty good idea with connecting some of these dots where things might be going. And I think this is going to be an exciting year for ARM and for our industry using ARM as well.
So let's talk about what I kind of consider what is the next computer question, because we've been talking about this a lot. What is my next workstation is something that I think about a lot, because that main workstation is making me all my money. It is one of the most important tools in my tool set. And you've moved from the Intel Mac Pro to the latest and greatest Mac Studio, and it's been performing really well for you. It actually performs better than my Intel Mac Pro in a lot of workloads. And it's a really good primary computer. But I'm looking at the workstation purchase as a 7 to 10 year long investment. And I want to get the most professional, the most rock solid, reliable, performant, incredible machine that I can just beat on all day, every day. And I don't think Apple is quite there yet with their product line. Obviously, they do have a ARM Apple M series Mac Pro now. It's essentially a Mac Studio in the bigger case. The only thing you get is some PCI slots, but because it doesn't support discrete GPUs, there's not much use for that. You get it for your deck link. I'm not sure if that's
deck link, maybe network card, or a NVMe card or something like that.
To me, here's the fundamental question. We've already mentioned that Apple, and using SoCs, they scale up by quantity, right? So you get the fastest SoC you can get, then you make two of them, and you interconnect them. Right. Now, at some point, you make it such a big unit that even your little Mac Studio can't dissipate the heat or can't provide it enough power.
Yep.
That's where I think the next generation Mac Pro could excel, because that chassis we know can deliver, I think it's like a 1500 or a 2000 watt power supply in that. It can deliver tons of power, and it can remove and dissipate massive amounts of heat. So right now, between the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro, buy the Mac Studio all day long, because the Mac Pro is no faster, right? They're not using that chassis to anywhere near its max.
Yeah, it's something they already had the R&D and the investment in. Why retool if you don't need to? Just drop in the chip and let it work.
So here's the question for Apple and me. And this is how, and this is what it comes down to. Are me and Apple going to stay workstation friends? Because I like you said at the very beginning, we go with what is the best tool for the job at the time. I've gone from Linux. I've gone from Windows NT to IRIX to Linux to Windows again to Mac. Could be Linux again, could be Windows again. Whoever's making the best workstation is where I'm going to go every time. That's what brought me back to the Mac, was that 2019 Mac Pro. Now, what's going to keep me on the Mac is if Apple does the following. They take some of these big, beautiful SoCs that they have, and they somehow get 4 of them interconnected together, and that thing puts out enough heat and takes enough power that they actually really need to put it in that big Mac Pro chassis to make it work. That will be a monster machine. The fundamental question that you came up with, I think, is will they keep on using their own GPUs on the die, or will they make their own external GPU, make the dies CPU only, and it's like have tons of CPU and tons of GPU? I think that configuration is unlikely. I don't think we're going to see a Mac with discrete GPUs probably ever again. I don't think Apple wants to be in the business of making PCI cards. I don't think they want to be in the business of selling upgrade kits. They want to sell you a box that you use until it's done.
Let me interrupt for a second, because I had one thought about this. I tend to agree. I think that they have too much R&D and investment in the architecture that they've designed to have it for a relatively niche product.
They cannot reinvent the wheel for the Mac Pro.
Right. They can't pour in millions and millions of dollars to something that's going to sell thousands, maybe tens of thousands of units versus the millions of units that they sell for their other machines. So I agree with that part. I will say, though, that we've been thinking about this move over in maybe some clouded, slightly biased fashion, and that is, one, that somebody else doesn't move the needle, right? So far, Qualcomm and Snapdragon, that's been mobile products. That's been like the laptop behind me. That's been for those kind of things. Microsoft, Qualcomm, there hasn't been like a consumer push yet into more desktop workstation-y type computers in a major way. I mean, they have a little bit, but those companies, they've kind of ceded that to, we'll get to this in a minute, they've kind of ceded that to NVIDIA, who's part owner in ARM, and other, more data center focused type of machines. So that could push Apple a little bit in that direction. But two, I think we've been thinking about it in a traditional form factor. So when the Mac Studio came out, I think besides the ARM stuff, it was like, wow, that is a weird design, right? In principle, it was like, that is a weird box. It's a big square, not a little square. And it's not a workstation size, it's not a tower, it's not a racking. So I think there is potential for, I think the current Mac Pro is a 5U chassis, right? And it has a lot of space in it for all the things we talked about, PCI slots and, RAM and all that kind of stuff. I think it is possible that they could reinvent that chassis a little bit to take advantage of something that's like, hey, maybe we lose the PCI cards, but we go to a 2U or a 1U even, likely, probably not, because I think they don't want to have to reinvent the wheel for a niche product, but that kind of thing is always within their.
Yeah. So the question is, where do they go next? Do they build a bigger Mac Studio, or do they build an epic Mac Pro? Personally, I think for most people, the bigger Mac Studio would be a wonderful choice. For me, I prefer a level of professionality in a work computer that is above the Mac Studio.
And just to be clear, because I know this, but our audience probably doesn't. Joey has some very strong opinions on things like thermal performance, connectivity placement, things of that nature. And I own 4 Mac Studios in various places at home and at the office and stuff. And it's a little bit of a hack job, right? It's like, okay, fine, to get them in a rack mount, I had to buy a case to rack mount them. Okay, to get PCI slots, I'm depending on Thunderbolt expansion. Oh, but wait, I want it rack mount. Well, that's even more so to get it to operate like a workstation is a little bit of a hack job. But again, Apple might not go down that route. They might just say, this is not worth our R&D and time to please Joey and Rob.
And I think
we're out of that market.
I think that's a likely outcome, honestly. I'm holding out hope that they come out with a big bad Mac Pro that meets my standard of workstation. Yeah. But I think it's unlikely that they will. And just to go into a little bit more detail, ARM, while being not new, as we've said, is new to Mac OS and is new to a lot of the fundamental software that we use. And I don't mean just DaVinci Resolve or Adobe or anything else. Just about any modern software is built on piles and piles and piles of libraries that handle certain parts of the code, whether it be file IO, whether it be dealing with strings, whether it be dealing with times and dates. There's thousands of libraries that all had to be kind of ported and optimized and compiled for Mac on ARM. That's why it took some time.
Oh, it's still in transition for a lot of people. Yeah.
Exactly. And what I have said anecdotally, and I'm gonna say it here, get ready, internet, to be mad. But I don't think that the ARM Macs, in terms of workstation level reliability, are really ready for prime time in the software department. And what I mean by that is they crash more, they need to be rebooted more, just little intangible things. I feel like I've used them long enough now that I can say, yeah, my Intel Mac is definitely more stable than any of the ARM Macs. And to be clear, this is a huge generational transition. It will get there. And I'm really, really nitpicking here.
Well, I think the one thing that Apple in particular, and Qualcomm and NVIDIA might have some of this, but they're not as vertically integrated through the whole ecosystem as Apple is. I mean, Apple does a lot of tricks, kind of things under the hood to kind of get some of this stuff to work a little bit better. When we've seen it over the years with their phones and how the phones and the mobile devices work, they're porting some of that to this. So, I'm more of a risk taker, edge use case, first adopter, see if it breaks kind of thing. And I've anecdotally, I've been really pleased with the performance, right? I've been really pleased with the acoustics. I've been pleased with the thermals and just the overall performance. But I mean, I'm not kidding you that I have the same lust factor over raw power, that you have and a lot of people have. And I frequently find myself at 11 o'clock at night sitting on the couch with my iPad, my ARM processor in my hands, looking at, like super micro sites and building, quad CPU, 96 core beasts and stuff like that. I get that raw power. So that expiration, I think it's worth noting, does have some legs, right? And I think that over the past 5, 6, 7 years, the highest end buyers, that is the data center buyer, has also made a little bit of a transition, slowly but surely, moving away from Intel, moving away from AMD, going to integrated SoCs that we're seeing from companies like NVIDIA, for example, right? And I said earlier, NVIDIA, slightly complicated owner of the ARM architecture or whatever, and there's been some legal stuff going on there. But my point is that we have seen that, and now we're starting to see that filter out the other way back to the workstation market. So I discovered this company, System 76, not an endorsement of System 76 at all, just with my Google foo found them. And let me tell you some specs on this box real quick, because this is like, on paper, this is drool worthy, and this is everything you'd want a workstation to be. So starting with the processor, it's the Ampere Ultra, up to 128 cores, 3 gigahertz. That's a ARM processor that company is coming out for workstations, which is great. 512 gigs of RAM. Oh, and guess what? Dedicated GPUs from NVIDIA. So if you want an A6000 or something in there, here's the only thing about it, man, is that it's running Ubuntu. And I don't mean that as in a negative way. I mean that it is Linux on ARM. So all the components are there, but guess what? Not a lot of software developers are making creative applications for Linux running on ARM, and that's where we're going to get stuck, I think, yeah?
Exactly. So here's where we get to, the other big elephant in the room is, what does this mean for big workstations and for cloud workstations? We keep talking about what's our next computer do we buy? It might not be a computer at all. It might be an instance in the cloud, because for all the reasons that we said ARM is a good performer, it's an even better performer for data centers. You have this company, Ampere, that makes these gigantic data center CPUs that have 64, 128 or more ARM cores. That means in one rack unit server at Amazon, they can split those 128 cores into a boatload of virtual machines. Right? So for the amount of the density of power that gets put into each server is so much higher with these ARM CPUs that you can get cloud compute, cloud workstations, cloud servers cheaper if you opt for ARM. And that's across the board with all cloud providers. You can choose these days between ARM instances and Intel instances, and the ARM instances are cheaper. What does that mean? It means, let's look at all the pieces to this ecosystem, right? We've got the CPU, ARM, wonderful. Linux runs on it, great. Resolve runs on Linux, great. GPUs, we've got NVIDIA GPUs that can be virtualized, so you can take one gigantic GPU and split it up into little GPU assignments per virtual machine. Guess what? Linux supports that, works perfectly. Resolve supports NVIDIA GPUs. It just doesn't support NVIDIA GPUs virtualized with an ARM CPU on Linux. So all of these little ingredients are all there in the ecosystem. They just haven't been put together. Imagine with me, if you will, Blackmagic comes up with a version of Resolve that runs on ARM Linux and uses discrete or virtualized GPUs. You now have the perfect equation for a fully cloud-based workstation offering that will have the power of the discrete GPU, have the efficiency and the cost savings of ARM, and run the same DaVinci Resolve you've always run. We've priced out virtualized workstations in the cloud running Windows, NVIDIA, and Intel, and it can be done, and they actually run very well. It is just really price prohibitive right now. If my imaginary dream of a fully cloud workstation comes to fruition on the software side, I think the cost could be at the point where it is, a good question. Do I just pay a monthly fee based on usage for a workstation in the cloud and storage? And I just own a small thin client that connects to my DeckLink, uses remote monitoring, and connects to my mini panel, uses the Blackmagic remote panel.
Yeah. I think there's something to it. If we adopted, or people who wanted to adopt that, you'd be cutting edge, bleeding edge, or however you want to say it at first. But I think clearly everything is moving in that direction, right? You only have to look at the virtualized, cloud NAS systems like, Lucid Link, all that kind of stuff. People are moving to that space anyway, want location independence, want, decentralization of where the stuff is, all that kind of stuff. So I do think that makes a lot of sense. I'm with you on the exploration of that. I'm a little hesitant for all of the intangible feel good reasons to do that, right? I mean,
I love having the monster workstation. That's why I'm keeping my 2019 until the very last breath.
But it's even more simple than that. It's like, oh, well, something's wrong. Like, let me just go hit restart, right? I guess there could be a tier of that kind of service where it's like it's dedicated to you and to you only. But the models for a lot of cloud is that you're sharing resources with other people. So like the ability to be like, hey, let's just restart the box, probably not existing in the same way that it is now when the physical piece of hardware is right in front of you.
Yeah, but I think it's like you said. I'm imagining some bleeding edge stuff.
Right.
I think this is going to be the space to watch at NAB this year is cloud offerings of various software that are optimized for, we're probably going to see different marketing terms for it. We might see cloud native or like a Amazon dedicated instance to this, or other companies might kind of make their own service offering with their own branding. But at the end of the day, the combination of highly efficient ARM CPUs, virtual GPUs, all in the cloud with kind of Linux putting it all together and the software being ported to that, I think we're going to see more movement on that than just from Blackmagic. And to be clear, I'm speculating about what Blackmagic is going to do. I know nothing about if they're going to come out with ARM Linux versions or anything like that.
Reading the tea leaves, it sort of makes sense, right? I mean, Apple,
they have all the disparate parts, right?
Yeah.
It runs on Linux, it runs on ARM, it runs on NVIDIA. It just doesn't do all those three things together yet.
And and also, I mean, think about it this way, from a distribution point of view, getting people up to the latest, like there is a level like Apple has for that kind of thing over from the developer's point of view of greater control over the product, right? So right now, you have a universe where people are like, well, I'm using everything from Resolve 12 up to Resolve latest and greatest, right? And every dot release in between. And so for a lot of like those emergency kind of like, bug fixes, that kind of stuff, the efficiency of pushing that out to controlled cloud instances versus having to distribute that kind of thing and hope people download it is a big boon for developers, because they can squash the complaints and bug issues much faster than they could by the traditional.
Part of it is almost going back to the systems days of old, where you bought a Flame. That Flame came with a $70,000 Octane because that was the computer it ran on, and that's what it was designed for, right?
Yeah.
So there was one qualified set of hardware for that, and that's obviously gone completely out the window with the way modern creative applications work. And in a lot of cases, that's for the better. You can use them on your own hardware, you can do your own configurations, whatever. But if this move to ARM industry-wide kind of allows more virtualized solutions, you can put the ideal hardware configuration in a config file and just boot it up on Amazon.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a little scary. Honestly, I think it is scary to people to pull control and to have essentially a service that you don't know how it's connected. You don't know what the rack looks like. You don't know what's next to it. You don't know who's touching it. Like all of this kind of, I get that part. It is a little weird and scary, but it's not, we're making it so people are getting more comfortable with putting their data in the cloud, right? And working in cloud-based storage. So like, I think you're right. It's only a matter of time between these truly virtualized, situations become more commonplace. There's always going to be the edge case of use though, right? The air gap systems and the place that, can't have that connected.
I'm going to live in that edge case probably.
Right. There's a lot of reasons compelling either way, but I do think, to your greater point, it will become more common. And I do think NAB this year is going to be a fascinating read. I think the Worldwide Developer Conference from Apple, NVIDIA's annual conference, all these things I think over the next year are going to have some clarity on where we're going with this stuff too.
Yeah, and again, if Blackmagic does make this hypothetical NVIDIA capable Linux resolve that works great in the cloud, it would also work great on monster ARM workstations that you could buy for your own setup. To kind of wrap this whole thing up, I know we've gone really all over the place here, but ARM has been a great transition for the industry. I'm very excited about it. It's bringing in more competition in more areas than we've had in a very long time, right?
Yeah.
The fact that Apple is making GPUs that, for our purposes at least, are rivaling the big NVIDIA ones, well, guess what? That's just going to make NVIDIA make bigger and badder GPUs. And now Qualcomm's getting in the GPU game with their Snapdragon laptops that run Resolve really, really, really well.
No, I agree, man. And I think, I think really what this comes down to is people look to Apple as a trendsetter, even though they tend to be late to the game most of the time, but in a trendsetter in the way of getting it out to the masses, right? And I think a large part of this for our work and our workflows is going to be how much tolerance does Apple have to create relatively niche products just to say they have it in their product lineup? And that's a big question mark, right? Because if I was a bean counter at Apple, I'd go, guys, this makes zero sense, right? Like, we sell millions and tens of millions of iPhones and iPads. Great, let's focus there. Sure, we'll make laptops because people like to be mobile and like to use laptops. Okay, cool. We'll appease the creative guy by having the studio, but like, the workstation market is not Apple's game, right? And so
honestly, I was surprised when 2019 came out.
Right.
I didn't, after the disaster that was the 2013, I was surprised they not only came back into that game, but came into that game with such a superlatively good offering.
So I'm not convinced that Apple is the place, like you, I'm not convinced Apple is the place to watch for that next big development. I hope it is, because I like a lot of things about that ecosystem.
Yeah.
But, I think it is encouraging that, over the past couple of years, there really hasn't been an alternative for people like us, right? Unless you wanted a less capable Snapdragon system or something like that. But now that we're seeing this development on, Linux ARM, Windows-based ARM systems, like, okay, cool. Like, we're now seeing the benefits of the SoC and the architecture, and now we're going to get some choices. It's to be seen whether that's from, Apple, NVIDIA, whoever, to develop that next great thing that, our industry will adopt. I have hopes, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, Joey, always a good conversation. I appreciate your knowledge and history of this. By the way, for the low price of $15.99, you can take a tour of Joey's computing museum in his basement. You just have to get to Maryland and buy some tickets. But no, in all seriousness, I think this is a good discussion. Again, we're not, there's a lot to be understood about the manufacturing of these chips and the design considerations. A lot of information out there on the web that I encourage you to take a look at it. Some of it's technical and kind of hard to read, but this is at the forefront of our industry right now. So it's definitely time to get educated on it. So for the Offset Podcast, I'm Robbie Carmen.
And I'm Joey Diano. Thanks for listening.